Hello. Holy smokes, Nappy, right in there right away.
Everything's
Don't
great.
waste no time, Nappy. Just come on in,
Everything
buddy.
is awesome.
Start gifting subs right away to everybody. So, appreciate you, buddy. Thanks for. I'm glad you could make the stream. Dingle's here too. Looks like you're just in time. Absolutely. Hell's here. Good job, Louie. Thanks for getting here first. You get the badge for most punctual, awarded to Louie Blah, everybody. And Nappy, thanks for gifting a sub to Louie. Appreciate that a lot. Recruit's here too. Mr. Holland himself, just fresh off vacation from touring his glorious country. Hope you had a good vacation yesterday, or a couple weeks ago there, Louie, or Recruit. Appreciate you coming in. I'd like to present the award for most nerd. Nerd is a term that we use around here rather flippantly in the sense of we're all techies, so we kind of make fun of each other. I'm talking to my guest. He's off camera at the moment. I'll introduce you to him in just 2 seconds. Thanks, you guys, for showing up. Got a pretty interesting day today, not going to lie. A couple big things that I want to talk about. My alma mater, Spring Arbor University, blessed me with a cover and an article on their latest journal, the Spring Journal, which I'll show you guys in a little bit. Pretty excited about that. You can view that online, and I will give you that link here in a second. Pretty excited. I'd like to get your feedback on it if I could. It's a pretty interesting article. Talks a little bit about Rise Above and how we got to where we are and kind of the journey that we went on to get here, and ultimately talks a lot about how it's dependent on relationships and how relationships like this, even though it's electronic, it's digital, it's no different than if you guys were in the room. So it's as critical. So thanks a lot, guys, for making this happen. It's the work that you guys are helping us do every day here at Rise Above is being recognized by our community, and I appreciate the effort. So as I was saying, today we have an amazing author by the name of Andy Skarzinski in the house, and Skarzinski. Let's say it correctly. Skarzinski in the house, and I'm learning. See, I can be taught. We're going to talk a lot about his kind of story, in particular his the second half of his story and his author work as an author here in the United States, in the books that he's written, in particular his latest book, which I'm pretty excited to talk about. And it's in the title I showed you guys already, but Andy and the St. Joseph Home for Boys. I'll talk a lot about this on the second half of the stream. But first, let's talk about this amazing article that Spring Arbor University wrote in regards to Rise Above and us here, our staff, and particularly the Veronica and Neil journey that we've all been on. So I'll show you this is the cover here, just to give you an idea. And there's some other folks in the cover with me. But so there's the journal there. That's what you're going to see. And there's me down in the corner. I can make the page turn. Look at that. It's pretty fancy. So they came to me, I want to say, November last year. Hey, Rabbi, thanks for making it in, buddy. Appreciate it. So they came to me in November last year and said, hey, we just really want to go to our alumni who are making a difference in their community and indeed in the world and introduce current students and so handsome. Thanks, Rabbi. To current students as well as alumni, and just say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what SAU, Spring Arbor University, is doing out there with our alumni. So this was the cover, and this was the actual article itself that they produced. And for those who haven't seen, the picture at the top is the front of the school, the entrance. Rise Above is housed in the old Jackson County Juvenile Home, which is a phenomenal transition from what it was to what it is now. The idea that you could take an institution that was once meant as a penalty to penalize students for activities that they were involved in, to now it's a place where it's restorative, to where they can take an incident that's happened in their lives that's removed them from the public school systems and be brought to a place where they're made whole and made they're basically given a chance to restore themselves, which is a lot of fun. So it's a great article. It's easily found at arbor.edu, arbor.edu, and then the Alumni Journal. you can find it. Just put a Spring Arbor University Journal and just click on the Spring 2020, and that'll give you a chance to read the article there. So yeah, thank you, Spring Arbor University, for doing that amazing thing for Rise Above and for our students. How is everybody today anyways? Nappy. Don't take credit for his handsome comment to me. Come on now. Maybe he was talking to you. I don't know. So let's all say hi real quick to my guest, Mr. Andy. Andy, welcome to the stream, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you indeed. Just pull your mic up a smidge closer to your face there for me. Awesome. Perfect.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. Andy, you came in from Texas.
Yes.
You're not like around the corner. Not like you drove around the block and was like, hey, I heard about this thing called Rise Above and Neil Fernandez. I want to go talk about my book.
Oh, no, 1,200 miles.
1,200 miles the man came in. So everyone say hi to Andy. Thanks for everyone that's here today to start the stream to get us to a point where we can have this conversation. So, Andy, you're originally from Jackson, though.
Yes, I was born here in Jackson.
Yeah.
And for the most part, lived in Spring Arbor for quite a while before my journey with the orphanage.
Yeah. So you were in Jackson up until what point?
Well, I was born in Jackson.
Yeah.
Lived in Spring Arbor. Our home was in Spring Arbor.
Yep.
And I pretty much lived there for about 4 to 5 years before I was put into the orphanage.
Yep.
For a period of 5 years. And then after that, I then went back to live in the same house there in Spring Arbor. And then when I finished my schooling at Michigan State.
Oh, nice.
And graduated there, I got a job with IBM down in Texas, in Austin, Texas.
Nice.
So that's when I moved to Texas.
You'll fit right in with all these techie people here and love the stuff.
Oh, yeah. IBM was a great company, too.
Yeah.
They were involved in a lot of different technologies.
Yeah. So that's what brought you to Texas was IBM. So school, moved down to Texas. Yep. Now, you took the job there, or you went to Texas first and then was like, hey, there's this great place, IBM.
Nope. They recruited up here at Michigan State.
Oh, nice.
And offered me a job down there. And so they interviewed me. And when I left here during that particular day, it was in the teens and a blizzard here when I left. And then they started interviewing me. And then at lunchtime, they took me to the University of Texas campus.
Yeah.
Everybody's running around there in shorts and T-shirts. The temperature's in the 70s. And I'm going, this is paradise. I hope they offer me a job.
Yeah, welcome to Texas. Holy smokes. So, come from Michigan and freezing cold weather and snow to all of a sudden you're like shorts weather.
It was an easy choice.
Yeah, no doubt. Man, oh man. I often think I'm of European background, Portuguese by my father, and I often think, I think I could move to Portugal. I think I would be not offended if I had to move to Portugal full time and spend some time in the old family home, Yeah. But so you moved to Texas. You've lived in Texas how long now?
Oh, geez.
Not to age yourself, I hear, but
let's see. Right now, 43 years.
Oh my goodness.
I worked for IBM for 30 years, and then, that's when I could qualify to retire there. So
gotcha.
I was I wasn't one of those folks that said, well, what am I going to do when I retire? I said, I'm going to retire as early as I could.
Yeah.
So,
now, did you have a plan in place when you were set to retire? Because obviously you're writing books now. So was that kind of the plan when you retired? Or
not at all. In fact, if somebody would have told me 6 years ago that I was going to write science fiction or write any kind of book, I would have told them they were loony.
Yeah.
But it all started with dreams.
Really?
Yeah.
Describe that.
Well, I actually started out writing a financial book for my kids to transfer the knowledge that I had in my head for doing some, investments and stuff like that. But then I started getting involved. These dreams started coming to me, and I decided to go with that flow. And so I put that manuscript aside. There was already 400 pages that I'd written for that, but I put that manuscript aside. And I just said, well, there must be a purpose to all these dreams. So I'd wake up with a chapter or two worth of material almost every morning. As soon as I got up, I'd get my cup of coffee, sit behind the computer, and start writing. And I'd write until whatever was on my mind at that time was gone. But usually that led to even more stuff to write. And they were kind of wild dreams. I mean, a new world, the future, crazy animals and creatures and monsters. So that's kind of where I was. And I wasn't really intended to write more than just the one novel that I started with. But then after my first book signing, a lady came up to me.
Then after my first book signing, just that thing that we do.
A lady came up to me and she started shaking me by the shoulder. She said, "When are you going to write the next book?"
Really?
Then I looked at my wife and she looked at me and we kind of nodded and said, "Well, I guess I'll have to start working on that." So that's how the second book got started.
So did you have any formal training in writing or English or literature?
I mean, just whatever English I got in high school.
Really?
Is really all I got. Now, where I really got help was when I started that financial book, one of my neighbors was offered to edit it and look at it and stuff. And so she suggested that I go down and join a writers group. So I did.
A writers guild type thing? Yeah.
And so I did and got involved in doing what we call reading critique, where you read part of your story and they critique it on the spot. So I really enjoyed that. It was kind of nerve-wracking at first because you got to read your story. I mean, I'm not used to reading out loud to everybody, and and then you just kind of, and then they get kind of critical about your work, and you don't kind of like that at first because you think you're the best writer there is, right?
Yeah.
But then they let you know that you're really not even close.
What do you mean I'm not the best?
So anyway, I liked it so much, I actually joined 3 writers groups. I was in one of them, I was driving an hour both ways just to get to the group and do the reading critiques. And I really liked that group because they were the most critical. And I thought
they were honest with you.
They were honest with me. And that was the thing that meant the most to me.
Yeah.
And that's where I learned the most about writing.
And that's a critical life lesson, isn't it, though?
Oh, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
The people that are most on, that's where you learn them. And guys, chat, if you guys have any questions, comments, and I see Rabbi and Nappy already kind of going back and forth. If you have any comments, questions, anything like that, by all means, throw them out. If I missed something, you're like, hey, I wish you should have asked that. Ask the question. We're reading chat, and we definitely want to try and get to as many of the questions as possible today. So you you start these writer guilds, kind of self-help groups. They're almost therapy, I'm sure, to some level. Because you kind of vent on each other about writer's block and everything else. But so how do you come to the conclusion at some point where you're like, holy crow, I think my life's journey just took a big 180 here, and I went from being retired to now being an author.
Well, usually when I start a project and I get into it, I got to see it to the end.
Yeah.
And I wasn't quite sure why I was being led down this path of writing, especially writing science fiction, which is like I never imagined myself writing science fiction.
Now, were you a science fiction reader before that? Did you read a lot of science fiction?
Yeah, but I didn't really read a whole lot. Back when I was in 4th or 5th grade, I read Homer's Ulysses, and so I was reading that, and I really enjoyed that. And that was about adventure and odd animals or monsters and stuff like that. So. But I still didn't understand why I was going down that path because I was, I graduated with an engineering degree. Mm-hmm. I was a technical guy. I was not this creative kind of guy that comes up with these new worlds and all that kind of stuff. So it really wasn't until I got up here in Michigan during a couple of my book signings, and then all of a sudden I saw people that I hadn't seen since high school or even before. And family members I hadn't seen in years and years and years showed up at the book signing. And that is what made me realize why, I guess, God had taken me down this path of writing these kind of books. So
I'm gonna pull up your books as you're talking here, so people can see. So these are the the books since we're talking about here. So the newest one is the Andy and the St. Joseph's Home for Boys.
Right.
The one that we're going to talk about second half of the stream here today. You've got volume 1, 2, and then Crimson Order. So the New World.
Yeah.
A Step Backwards, volume 1.
Yep, that was the first one, and I published that in 2015.
Okay. And then you've got a New World, Blue Moon Generation, volume 2.
Right. And that one was basically the generation that followed the first heroes of the first book.
Okay.
So the Blue Moon Generation was their children and offspring.
Okay. And then the New World, Crimson Winter.
Right. And that one followed. And it started out in 2075, gone up. And then the Blue Moon Generation was 2093. Mm-hmm. And then the other one starts right after the turn of the next century. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, did you look to any other authors?
No. Just, again, it was my dreams. My dreams really pretty much dictated what I was going to write in the first 2 volumes. Okay. The one that followed, I started down that path and had a lot of dreams, but actually we were interrupted during that writing, whereas the first 2 books took 9 to 12 months to write and publish. This one ended up taking 2 years and almost a 9 to 12-month interruption there where I wasn't writing at all, which changed things, actually. With that little interruption of the flow of the story and just our change of life, basically, I didn't have those dreams anymore. And so for the second half of that last book, I actually had to generate my own content creation and stuff. So at first it was challenging, but then once I got in the flow, it was actually pretty exciting. So I think that was another one of those things where I think it was intended to happen, that I would learn how to write my own creative science fiction.
Sure. So I was, as you were talking about the timeline there, that's one of the things I was looking at the Amazon page there, and I saw 2015 and 2016. I'm thinking, holy crap, that's like a year. Like you wrote a book, and then you wrote another book within a year, like that.
Like I said, I'm determined, and that's why I was in the 3 different writer's groups, because I was going to 3 different reading critiques, reading every chapter to them, and getting critiqued on every single chapter.
Really? There
wasn't a single chapter that it didn't go through some kind of reading critique for. Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you, I like to read. I enjoy reading. I have to really want the content in the reading that I'm doing. If I don't connect with it, I have a hard time reading it. When I was in university, which is what brought us from Canada to the United States, I was a theology major, a biblical studies major, learning Greek and Hebrew at the same time as reading and responding every week to these theological writings and whatnot. And I am, let's just say, easily distracted.
Okay.
If I'm reading a book and I'm halfway through even a simple chapter, and something crinkles over here, I have to look. And then what happens is I lose my train of thought. So when I think of writing, it scares the dickens out of me when especially if it's creative writing, not a response, like a theological response. Is I can formulate an idea in my mind, a framework, and I can articulate it in my writing. But when if I'm asked or tasked with being creative, as you did in those 3 books, oh my dear Lord, I would have to be secluded on a desert island somewhere, and there could be no pins anywhere that could drop. I literally said to Veronica, my wife, last night, I couldn't imagine doing this. Like my personality would just go crazy. It would take me years to get one book out.
Definitely be a challenge for sure.
Rabbi says,
because I could sit there I would sometimes sit there for 4 to 6 hours writing before I really took that break. And
so you have to have a really patient wife then.
Oh yes, she's patient to a point. But after writing that first book, that's why we were thinking that would be the last book.
Yeah, because it's time consuming. It doesn't happen.
Oh yeah. There were days where I was sitting there for 8 to 12 hours writing this stuff, and the writing's the fun part, the creation and all that that is the fun part. The hardest part is preparing it for publication. I mean, actually going through and editing the thing. I mean, I must have read each of those books probably 10 times myself. My wife probably read them 3 or 4 times herself.
So are editors as ruthless as people say they are? When you get them into the hands of these people that turn them into paper form, are they really
well, they
cutting
can
out?
be, yes. And since I didn't want to, I didn't have a lot of money, so I didn't want to pay an editor. I just asked for volunteers. Who would like to be a beta reader that would be able to read my manuscript as I develop it, and who wants to actually read it to the point where they would want to send me comments and edits, suggestions. I thought it was going to be hard finding people, but
Really?
in my first book, I just put out there on Facebook, anybody interested in reading the manuscript and want to be a beta reader? In an hour, I had 16 people signed up, and I was like shocked.
Really?
And then in the end, I had 60 signed up for that first book, and I was shocked.
60.
So in this book, the latest one that I wrote, I did the same thing, and in no time at all, I had 100 people want to be beta readers, and I had to cut it off. I said, well, 100 is just too much input.
Yeah.
You know, I get it far too much that I can keep up with. And I already had what I would say are 10 really good editors that had signed up to do the book.
Well, and besides,
so it was great.
When you get past a certain point, now you're cutting into your profits because these 100 people aren't going to read your book later on.
Well, you know what?
That's 100 less subscriptions to the way.
Well, that's another whole story about how I even got to writing that book, because I never planned on writing this book. In fact, I never planned on sharing this story. My wife and I had been married for 33 years. She didn't know anything about my orphanage experience. I didn't tell her anything about it. So it was really a shock to her as she's reading this story. She said, how come you didn't tell me all this stuff? You know, it was just something that my mind had subconsciously tucked away and hid away and just really never came to the surface. It wasn't until, well, how I got encouraged to write this story that I ended up writing the story.
So let's get there soon here. So Rabbi Ferret, one of the audience members, says, I'm curious to know how Andy thinks writing has helped him to be more self-aware. Has honing his process and getting feedback given him insight on yourself even?
Well,
nice.
Probably not as much on the first 3 books because they were science fiction, but on the latest book, the one that I wrote about myself, yes, deep introspection, and it brought out emotions that I never knew even were trapped inside me. I mean, there was one chapter there where my family is my dad and mom decided to get the divorce. Well, I had written that chapter and read it and reread it and edited it probably 6 or 7 times, and I even read it a couple of times out loud before I go to my reading critique, which I always do. Reading out loud is a very valuable trick because you find errors reading things out loud that you don't when you're reading them silently, because your mind just automatically fixes errors in its mind.
I used to do it all the time with my big theological papers. I would literally read them out loud or read them to somebody to catch my errors.
So when I got to the reading critique, I got through the whole chapter really well until I got to the point where I was coming from school, and my mom opened up the door, and there she was standing with the suitcases. And for some reason, it just hit me, and I broke down. And I couldn't finish that chapter. And I go, where did that come from? I mean, I didn't know that emotion was there. And so then I was a little more careful about, how I read these things and so forth, because I wanted to get the valuable feedback, and it can't get valuable feedback if I'm breaking down and crying during that session. So anyway, that's kind of, I discovered that my mind had automatically hidden this stuff away. I guess, I don't know if it was a protective thing to keep me from thinking about it when I was a kid so that I could move on to my new life. But once I left that orphanage back in 1965, I moved on to a new life of, going to school at Western High School and going on to a different life. And somehow that just got hidden away for more than 50 years until I started writing the story.
So would you say then that the process for this book was dramatically different?
Yes.
Similar to, the same?
It was dramatically different from just all the emotional stuff that was in that.
Because you're vested
self-awareness that came with writing that story. So it was very valuable. I didn't want to write the story only because I didn't really think I had enough to write.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
story.
yeah.
It wasn't until I started writing that I realized all these memories started flooding back, memories I didn't even know I had.
Yeah.
And then once I opened it up to people in the Facebook group from Jackson, okay, these people also had some of their own experiences with the St. Joseph Home for Boys.
So I was going to
And
talk
so
a little
they-
bit about that,
yeah.
because there's got to be something. So there's two parts to you writing this book for me that I immediately think of, and I think about this every time I stream, and because I know when I stream, I tell a little bit of myself. I bear a little bit more of my experience to these folks here, who are very gracious and very honoring. I'm always curious if any of my family is going to respond to what I've told.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious if anybody in my community is going to respond to what I've told.
Mm-hmm.
And now my community, we've talked about community on stream a lot, because community can be a microcosm. It could be, the entire state,
Yes.
it could literally.
Yep.
So I'm curious to know, in both of those instances, has your community responded? You hinted a little bit that there are other people from the home that came forward.
Oh, in a big way. In a big way.
And then I'm
mean,
curious if family has ever come forward and said, "Hey, what are we doing here?"
I didn't have anybody in the family that was really negative about doing this.
Sure.
Okay.
Did you go to them ahead of time and say, "Hey, guys, just so you know, this is what I'm planning," or?
Well, when I started writing this, I went to my brother and sister.
Sure.
Okay. The ones that were involved during this time. My brother and I were in the orphanage, and my sister stayed with our grandmother during this time.
Yeah.
But we saw each other occasionally on weekends when our dad would pick us up at the orphanage, and if he wasn't working overtime and couldn't do so. So I definitely wanted to make sure that they understood what I'd be writing about and see if there was any problems there. And that wasn't really any problem at all. Then I got to, after the orphanage experience, my dad remarried, and so they had 5 children. So I have, stepbrothers and sisters. So I talked, wanted to chat with a couple of those that were available to talk to, and occasionally, just touch base with them, seeing is there anything in there that's kind of, giving you some problems there.
Yeah.
So that went okay, and that was, I didn't really have any problems there. There was only 2 siblings of my dad that are still alive, a couple of aunts that are still alive. So I definitely talked to the one that I'm most familiar with, and the one that I knew the most. And basically, that family and many families back in those days didn't share what was going on within their own family.
Yeah, and that's why I was kind of curious about that dynamic. But
so she was actually learning a whole lot too by reading the book. She was a beta reader that I gave chapters to, and she was reading all along. And so it was kind of new to her too. She said, "Wow, I didn't even know you guys weren't involved in all that." Yeah. So,
and so your community though,
community-wise, that's how I got started writing this book. What happened was September of last year, my sister saw a picture of the orphanage. She shared it with me and said, "You might be interested in this, picture of the orphanage." I said, "Oh, that is interesting." So I asked her where she got it, and she told me she got it from that. You're probably from Jackson if Facebook page, and they got like 18,000 members on that page. And so I said, "Oh, okay." So I joined that group, that page, and I started reading some stuff and determined what it was that they were posting on there. So I said, well, I'll share a little story about the time I was at the orphanage. Well, I was shocked at the response. I mean, within 2 days, there were 700 reactions to it and 300 comments on this thing. I'm going, wow. So I thought, well, and people asking me, when are you going to write this story? And I said, I'm not writing the story. I'm just sharing some experiences with that. So I shared another one, and it went even crazier. So at that point, people were asking me, can I get on your buy list? And I said, what buy list?
We have a buy list suddenly?
For your book. I said, well, I'm not writing a book.
Yeah.
He said, I don't have a buy list. And so I don't plan on writing it. So I shared some more, and then it just got to the point where I was getting everybody, you got to write the book, got to write the book, got to write the book. So I finally, in October, I said, okay, I'm writing the book.
Yeah.
Well, it got pretty popular, and so as I wrote chapters, I was sharing excerpts, long excerpts, maybe a half of the chapter or 3/4 of the chapter with people, and it was going crazy. I mean, people were reacting to it a lot, and then finally the administrator of the Jackson group said, would you mind opening up your own author page and doing this stuff on your author page? I says, no, that's fine. He says, you can, share stuff, and if people want to join you on the author page. So, so on December 16th, I opened up my own author page and continued to share the excerpts and invited people to join if they wanted. Well, since December 16th, I now have 740-some members that have been following this book from, the earlier stages. And then along that process, there was one member that said, you might want to be careful. You're sharing all this story, and you may not have anybody that ever wants to buy the book.
Yeah, you got no content left.
Well, you know what? They regretted that because the people just swarmed
Really?
and said, what do you mean? We plan on buying this book. We love this story. So, I actually then had to hide this thing because I didn't want everybody beating up on this lady because she was just saying, something nice. And so that has not been a problem at all. I mean, people, in fact, when I started thinking about doing a book signing, I checked with the Carnegie
because you're
Library.
a pro at book signing now.
Well, I did 3 before. So I checked with the Carnegie Library, and at first they said, well, I don't know. We haven't had much success with book signings. People haven't been coming. And I said, I don't think that's going to be a problem, really. So I queried the people on my group. I said, who's going to come to the book signing?
Yeah.
2 days, 80 people said, come into the book signing.
Wow.
80 people. I says, well, I think, and then I said to the Carnegie Library, I think I want 2 book signings because people want to come on Saturday and they want to come on Thursday. Some that work, some that don't.
Yeah. Yep.
I got them split almost down the middle. Can we do 2? And I showed them all the stats and everything and says, yeah, I think we'll do that. Well, then the coronavirus came, and the director said, well, we got to kind of, can't have big groups like that. So they canceled that program, and so I thought, now I got to go scramble. All these people want to go. So I worked it out with the Book Cottage, and they were very gracious and said, yes, we'll do it on the same day.
Yep.
And we can do it right here.
That's awesome.
In Cook Lake. And so what I did with the coronavirus and everything to try to spread out the time so that there wouldn't be larger groups all peaked at the same time. We instead of doing it for 3 hours, I'm doing it for 5 hours each time, and so hopefully, it looks like we're still going to get a lot of people there, and
good.
And there's been a lot of people buying it on Amazon. So it wasn't sharing this story did not affect anybody. They went ahead and bought it anyway.
So let's get into the book a little bit then. So the book that we're talking about today is this one here. And in the St. Joseph Home for Boys, and that's the home there. I got another picture here I'll bring up real quick from the Pinterests. So it's the house on the far left here of the screen, and it was quite a sizable home.
Oh yeah,
it was. Do you know the origins of the home?
Actually, there was a banker.
Yep.
Who originally built that house in the 1880s. It was called the Thompson home, I think it was at that time.
Yep, that's my understanding as well.
And in the early 1900s, around 1910, I think it was, he had put it up for sale. And and I'm just going from stories that I heard, and I think there was a priest here at St. Joseph school here in the church that was helping people that were homeless or whatever.
Yep.
And he notified the Felician Sisters in Livonia that this mansion had gone up for sale, and that it might be a good place for an orphanage. And so they decided to go ahead and pursue purchasing it. They went ahead and got 2 loans, one for 30,000. I mean, one for 15,000, and another for 15,000. I think it was going for 32,000.
32,
like
I think
that.
was the number. Yeah.
So they bought that home, and at first they decided to use it as a place to teach sisters to become, young women to become nuns, and then within a year or so decided, well, let's make it a orphanage. Okay,
Yep.
so they did. They started out smaller, but then eventually got to the point where they were housing 50 boys, from ages of, young preschool to on up to, 12 years old. And then once they get a certain age, then they move on to other homes that take care of boys.
Yeah. And honestly, the building that we're in here, exact same demographic.
Yeah.
It was about 50 kids,
Yeah.
50 boys
Yeah.
and or girls that could be here. Originally was boys, but then they split the building up. They had the boys downstairs, girls upstairs.
Okay.
And our classrooms were the bunk rooms and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of history there. So
Yeah.
So this home exists. The nuns start it, 50 boys at a time. But you have a normal childhood up until
Right.
not a wealthy, but a normal
Right.
childhood.
Right. We lived in a very small home. It's only had 3 rooms. All 5 of us family members shared the same bedroom.
Sure.
Which wasn't ideal once things started getting a little bit testy between the parents. Okay. In fact, my brother and I, we both developed ulcers at a very young age, at 5 and 4.
Now you kind of hint at it in the book, but you attribute that to the kind of the little bit of the fighting that's happening.
Tension
And
between the
you
parents,
don't understand what's going on, but at the same time, it's it's affecting you and those sorts of things.
Yeah. And but before all that, I'm happy, excited. I think in the families, got a great situation and all that kind of stuff. And it really wasn't until and even when they're having the tension, I just thought it was normal kind of things that parents go through, you know. Not sure why I'm getting all the stomach problems, but I didn't really relate it to that at that time.
Yeah.
And it really was the shocker when I came home from kindergarten one day, and when my mom greeted me at the door, she had suitcases in hand and said, "We're leaving."
Yeah.
I was like, "What? What do you mean we're leaving?"
And you're how old at this time?
I was 5 years old.
5 years old.
Yeah. My brother was 4, and Vicky was only about 2. Okay. So at that point, she decides she's going to try to take care of us. But back in those days, it was rough for women to find really good jobs that paid well enough to be able to take care of three kids, right? And the time, I mean, there wasn't child care centers back in those days, right? There was the orphanage, which was when they had the capacity and they didn't have all orphans, they had some ability to take on children that were like a child care situation.
Yeah, and this facility that we're in here, even though it was a juvenile home or a home for wayward children, is how it was referred to. Even this home would be a home for kids in a similar situation where a parent could get in trouble, and because there was no structured system at that time to take on kids that where parents just weren't available or around, they would put them in. The kid didn't do anything wrong, but yet here they are in this situation here, where they're literally in. It's a prison. I mean, I showed you solitary confinement. There's actually a solitary confinement in 2 of them in this building. So, to find a kid here because his mom passed a bad check at the grocery store, But you're not in that situation. You're in a situation where your parents are separating or divorcing, and mom is struggling to keep and care.
Right. So eventually our dad gets custody, right? And then that's, at that point, since he's working full time, our grandmother was already late 60s, approaching 70s. She was okay with being able to take Vicky.
Yeah.
But there was no way to take 3 of us. So that's when our dad decided to put us in the orphanage, right?
And I think that was one of the heartbreaking lines for me, was when you're there at your grandma's house, and she's taking your little sister, and she says, "I just can't take all of you."
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I read that and I kind of like, my heart breaks a little bit because you're thinking, oh my gosh, this woman because you know a mother's heart. You just know a mother's heart.
She wanted to take us.
Absolutely.
Couldn't, right.
You know, and I read that and I remember just thinking my heart breaking. And again, Chad, if you guys have any questions, comments along the way, please chime in. I know Rabbi, let's use this as a pause here for a second, because Rabbi did ask a question. He says, when it comes to storytelling, there are authors who build something from the ground up and others who are winnowing away at a life or experience to find the story within it. Mm-hmm. It sounds like the latter is true for you in the latest book. Was there a moment or a chapter that helped you to find the whole story in writing? Or I would push that out to any one of the books, but particularly in this.
This one's so different than the other ones.
Yeah.
Really, this one, I don't know if there was a chapter per se, because I just started writing it from the beginning chronologically. Okay, this is how my
so you
life
sat down with a
started out.
timeline type of thing and just went at it. Yep.
And I started writing it that way. And I can't remember whether I mentioned to you earlier before this podcast, but I really didn't know that I had all these feelings trapped inside me. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I just started writing it. It wasn't until I started writing it that it really developed, and that it kept going on, mm-hmm. and that writing it, getting deeper and deeper into it, generated more of the memories that went on and continued in my life during that time. So it was kind of, like I said, chronological, developed as I was writing it, and more memories coming, okay?
Yeah.
From the heart, from the soul. This is, the feelings that I had, the memories that I had. Occasionally I would check with my brother and sister and make sure, are these some of them.
Am I just accurate? Sometimes we make up memories, yeah.
Yeah, and then there was also some boys that had been at the orphanage that connected with me after I was sharing these stories, sure. and they were there either before or maybe around that time.
Yep.
Maybe a little after. And so we shared some of our memories, and some of those were very similar. They had, they can remember the same. They went through some of the same trials and tribulations I did. Some of the trouble that I got into that were same kind of trouble they got into. Yeah. Taking shortcuts, along the railroad tracks or something like that when we're walking from St. John's to and from St. John's or to and from St. Stan's.
Yeah.
So I would say no big revelation of any particular chapter. I enjoyed writing the chapters. I didn't think I was going to enjoy writing the story. I didn't think I had enough, but as it went on, I did enjoy it, and it had a lot of meaning to me to be able to open up these thoughts and memories that I didn't even know I had.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get into more of the content of the book here in a second, but I do have I want to read a couple things that people are saying in chat, and then I have a comment and question myself as well. Andy, a good friend of mine from England here, says, my main question isn't really a question, but more of a GG, means it's awesome. I just read on your website that the first book was started in June 15th and published basically a year later.
Right.
He says that's crazy fast for a first book. And that's kind of the comment I was making earlier, that just seeing the pace that you're writing these books was quite something at one point. So
well, and these are self-published through Amazon, so I don't go through a publisher, which, once I get it to the point where you can actually publish it, if you were to open it up to an editor, it would take another whole year to get it published through them. It would just take forever to get it published through them. So,
so you
it's
self-published
through Amazon,
yeah.
right?
Okay.
That saves some time.
Yeah.
But again, it wasn't like I didn't have editors. I had opened it up to beta readers who volunteered, and some of these are English majors. Some were editors already. Some were professional editors.
There's a friend or a schoolhood friend or something that helped you. I think there's a comment at the beginning of the book I thought I read. Something about an acknowledgement.
Now, Sharon Hastings.
Yeah.
Now, she helped me with editing those first 3 books, okay? But she got very involved in the community and stuff like that and ran out of time to be able to do it for continue that process. But she has always had her hand in helping in some way or fashion with all of these books. And there were other classmates as well who helped. In fact, I haven't even gone through this discussion, but after I left the orphanage, I still had trouble at home with our dad. And actually the three of us, my brother and my sister and I, we all left home early. We didn't make it through high school staying at home.
Yeah.
So in that process, I ended up staying with one of my teachers and his wife. Mm-hmm. Well, his wife is a very good editor, and she helped me as well. Okay, so
that's awesome.
And they'll both be at my book signings. They've supported me.
God kind of
all
puts these
the
people
way
in front
through.
of you, right?
They've been wonderful people, and I even had in my first in the first book, when I had my first book signing in Spring Arbor, my old English teacher in high school, she showed up. I hadn't seen her since I left high school.
That's fun.
Right?
That's fun.
She was a total shock, so she was all excited and everything. So it's really.
So Nappy, Tom, another good friend of mine, says that his mother's mother passed away when his mom was 13, and she was the youngest at 7. Her father put her in an orphanage and had abandonment issues her whole life. He's just curious if you ever had any. Now, you had mentioned that you...
Well, the abandonment issues I had were all during that time when, each and every time we'd go home on a weekend and he'd have to drop us off, we're crying our eyes out. My brother and I are crying our eyes out for probably a half an hour, having to be dropped off and left there. Because, you look at that mansion and you go, wow, that's a really nice place. And we lived in this little Quonset hut, with 3 rooms, tiny, there were rooms in that mansion that were bigger than our whole home was.
Yeah.
But we would rather be at that little home than to be there.
Well, and that was
mainly because we had to be there.
Yeah.
And it's not that, I never had any abuse or anything, like maybe some people hear sometimes. I'd never witnessed any of that during any of my time with sisters or or the priest. They were really out there trying to help me be a better boy and stay out of trouble kind of thing. But I still thought of it as a prison. I couldn't just walk out that door anytime I wanted to. I could go to school, and I had to be back by a certain time and all that kind of stuff. But I couldn't go out in the woods and explore or do that kind of stuff like I could back on my farm and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions I was going to ask, is this idea of home.
Yeah.
We all identify one place as home, where we feel most comfortable, most at ease, the most relaxed, where we feel like we can be ourselves.
Yeah.
Is there ever a point where you feel like this is home for you?
The orphanage, no.
And you were there for 5 years, you said?
5 years, no, yeah. Never home. I was sad every time I got dropped off. Now, you become comfortable, with 50 boys, you're interacting with a little less than half of them because we're split up in some age groups, right? So you're interacting with them a lot. And when I first started out, I guess the way I got even in my mind was getting in trouble a lot, right?
Sure.
Well, boy, I sort of learned that wasn't always that great a thing. I learned, maybe getting in trouble. My rear end was getting sore, and my fingers were getting sore from writing 100 times. I shouldn't be doing this and that, right? Yeah. So, I kind of learned, maybe I shouldn't get in trouble as much. So I tried to go the straight and narrow. Once I found that was the better path for me, and. So I found that some of the younger boys who were having troubles and struggling tended to come to me and share their stories. And I've always been a good listener. I listen, hear their stories, and just try to make them feel better. That's something that's been with me since I was back in the orphanage and still today. I'll listen to somebody that tells me, what's going on. But it never felt like home, but I did get close to some of the boys, and they felt, I guess, close, like brothers in some ways, right?
Yeah. But it definitely didn't feel like that.
I didn't consider it home, no. But I did learn And, as I grew older and became mature, I learned that, what the sisters were doing for me were good things. And I really, in the end, I really appreciated what I went through. And if you were to ask me, even though I didn't think it was home, I would have rather have gone through those 5 years there at the orphanage than at home, now that I know what the situation was.
And I could give you a million stories about why that's probably accurate for your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to go through, I got a few things early in the book that highlighted that I want to talk a little bit about. And one of them is right in the introduction. It's literally the very first line.
Okay.
And it's something that we talk about a lot here at Rise Above. It's this idea of, what just happened is pretty crappy. What brought you here? Probably not your finest hour. But the reality is there is better things about to happen, Yeah. And the line is basically, it's literally, guys, the first line in the introduction of the book after the dedication says, life often offers disruptive challenges disguised as opportunities.
Yeah.
Explain that to me a little bit.
Well, of course, this is a huge challenge. It isn't what you wanted. It isn't what you liked. But the opportunity part was, here I was with the sisters of the orphanage who were very strict.
Yep.
And the Catholic schools that I went to were very strict. But I got a better education than I would have ever gotten if I would have stayed home. That's one of the reasons I would have rather been there.
Sure.
And the other thing is, we didn't have radio and TV or anything there. We didn't have distractions. So we spent an hour at least every day in study hall, and the sisters were there to help us if we had troubles. They weren't there to do our homework or anything. They were there to help guide us and make sure that we were on the right path. So they were doing the best they could to make sure that we were going to do well in school. So, I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but as I grew older, I realized they were there to try to make me the best man I could be, to be an independent person, to be able to live my life and go on beyond this orphanage at some point in time and be able to be, Andy Skrzyński, somebody that could be successful. Yeah. Right?
And so there are some pretty, you're a pretty famous guy that's come out of there. There's also another pretty famous guy that's come out of there. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. So Tom Monahan, who's Tom Monahan?
He is the CEO of Domino's Pizza.
Founder and CEO of Domino's Pizza. So, some pretty big people come out of that building.
Oh, yeah.
As well as some pretty big people came into that building.
Absolutely.
So we have an astronaut that went through that building and honored you guys, and you guys gave him a little token to take away to... I don't know if you were there. I think you said you met him.
Yes. Met him he came down to the gym.
So describe this to me. Who are we talking about, for one?
Captain McDivitt.
Yep.
And he was a rookie astronaut, but was in charge of his flight during that particular flight that he took. And he lived in the Jackson area, and so he, would do these kinds of things. And he just dropped in on the orphanage. And he came down. We were playing basketball down in the gym, and I didn't know who he was, but there were helpers that would come from Jackson High School, from right around the corner.
Sure.
Some of the older, usually athletics, helpers that would come and help teach us to play basketball or whatever, softball or whatever. And they were there, and they recognized him when he walked in the gym, and they were all excited, and they said, you want to come and see this? And so I'm wondering, who is this guy? But then, they introduced me and all that kind of stuff, and it was like, wow, he's
That's
an
crazy.
astronaut. Yeah, that was big,
Yeah. So you got an astronaut going through. You have the founder of Domino's Pizza. Americans definitely know what Domino's Pizza is. I don't know if the Europeans will know a whole lot what Domino's Pizza is. You guys might have it in England, but. So again, Andy, you're in-house talking. For those who just joined us, Andy's here talking about his latest book, Andy and the St. Joseph's Home for Boys. Literally, this is here in my community in Jackson, Michigan. And so, Andy, you start off the book with this idea that often life is difficult, but can be overcome and provide great opportunities. Yeah. One of the things that I wasn't sure about, why were you switching schools so much so early? if I can ask that?
Well, I wasn't sure why we went. I don't know for sure why we transferred from St. John's to St. Stan's, other than St. Stan's was in the Polish community.
Got you.
Okay, and my grandmother was there, and my uncles and aunts and my dad went to St. Stan's.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
it might have been a personal choice that my father asked for or something like that. That's probably why we ended up there, but I'm guessing. Because, I mean, I want to say, in those days, not only did siblings not share what it is that was going on in their own family, the parents, but parents shared nothing with the kids about what their thoughts were and why we're, what the choices were and the reasons for all these decisions were.
Yeah, and even in my household, you never asked your parents those types of questions. You never asked how much do you make. It really, it just was
You could ask and they wouldn't tell you anyway.
Yeah, you weren't getting very far with that. Kind of old school. My parents, being Portuguese, were pretty pretty old school. Let's just say that.
Yep.
Nappy, you graduated from 8th grade from St. Stan's, a Polish school. Nice. Now that's out on the East Coast, right? Right, Nappy? Is that where you're still in the same kind of geographic area? East Coast of the U.S.? My parents spoke in Polish, so we wouldn't know what they're talking about. Buffalo, New York. Yeah. So
was that Polish school operated by sisters as well?
Nappy?
Maybe even the Felician sisters, because the Felician sisters were actually generated to help Polish immigrants kind of get adapted.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nappy says yeah. Tom says
yeah.
That's so cool. So you got a pretty unique connection there. On chapter 4, at the very top of the page, I like the little quotes that you put at each start of each chapter. It says, and I quote you: "While growing up can be hard, not growing up is harder in the end." What are you thinking when you said? And I tell you, because that is a huge. I am stealing this from you. I'll give you credit, but I'm stealing this from you. This is a huge problem for our students right now. This phrase.
Yeah, and at some point you got to decide. Am I going to continue going down the path of causing problems or being a problem myself or following people that are always getting into trouble?
Yeah.
Or am I going to turn that around somehow and, not be upset that I'm in this situation, but I'm going to somehow come out of this in a better way and out, having a better life.
Yeah.
Okay. Somewhere you got to make that decision. And it comes at different ages, but there are people that you see in life that, they can be, there's people in their 50s and 60s that have never really grown up, that have never really decided that they weren't going to go down that bad path and cause problems. So
now, if you ask my wife will say I still haven't grown up, but we're talking about something different here.
Right, yes. I still like to be a boy, too.
Yeah.
My wife would tell me I was still a boy.
So, and the reason why I say it is because a lot of our kids get stuck, right? They get stuck in this immature stage where they just don't think they're able to make those good decisions, those different right decisions for themselves, whatever that right decision is. And we find very often we spend the bulk of our time here trying to convince them, no, you're good enough to do this. You have the ability
Absolutely.
To make these decisions and to overcome whatever this thing is, this single point in time. I often refer to it as a rope, a tether that's around their waist, just pulling them back, And our job is to help cut that.
I'll go a step further. It's only them that can make that decision.
Yeah. And that's
nobody else can make that decision for them. They have to make that decision within themselves that they're going to turn that around. And it could be the smallest of things can lead to that, and sometimes very surprising. And I'll give you an example. I decided I wasn't going to get in trouble and stay in trouble in the orphanage at some point, but it took 2 or 3 years for me to figure that out, right? And then I, started thinking about being good and staying on that good side. Well, that changed a little bit when I went to when I got out of the orphanage and I went to a public school. You know,
That story is
you're
hilarious.
under all this strict,
Yeah.
you know, teachings,
Yeah.
and then you go to public school and everybody's talking and the teacher doesn't seem to care, and
Yeah.
you know, you got all this freedom that you didn't have.
Yeah.
Well, then sometimes, and I was guilty of taking advantage of that. Man, I am going to enjoy this freedom that I got. Well, you go overboard sometimes. So I was, you know, either had to stand outside the classroom because I was talking too much. Sometimes I got to talking too much and
Sure.
and enjoying myself too much in class and getting in trouble. So I did get in trouble a lot in my first 2-3 years at high school.
You were stretching your legs a little bit.
Yeah, stretching my legs. You got it. Right. Enjoying life a little more. Well, in that particular school, our lockers were assigned by our last names. And there was this one girl that was always next to me because of our names.
Yeah.
And one day she just looked at me and she said, Andy, if you would just stop hanging around those guys that are always getting you in trouble and stop swearing all the time, you'd be a nice guy. And it just, for some reason, what she said there really hit me. And I kept thinking about that and thinking about that and thinking about that. And I says, yeah, she's probably right. And so that little comment, and we never spoke other than hi and bye and all that, but that little comment really turned my life around in high school. And I made a change in friends and so forth. And where if I would have continued down that path, I probably could have been getting into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar story. It wasn't somebody who said it to me. It was like a little birdie in my head type of situation where, you know, I'd had a lifelong friend growing up all the way through grade school and high school, literally no issues. We'd walk right into each other's houses, you know, and we called each other parents mom and dad and things of that nature. And one day him and I left the school. It was probably 9th grade. We left the school at the same time, kind of to walk downtown where I'm from in Canada. And as we're walking downtown, I can picture it like it was yesterday. I could show you the picture of where the beer store was, what bank I was by, and everything else. And I remember he was on my right-hand side, and I remember looking at him, and he had I'd never seen him light a cigarette in my life. But for some reason, he pulled out a cigarette and was lighting a cigarette. And my mom to this day is a chain smoker, so it wasn't like smoking was weird to me.
Yeah, right.
But I looked at him and I saw him lighting a cigarette, and in my mind I went, no, I'm not doing that. Not today.
Yeah.
I literally made a left-hand turn, crossed the street to the bank, and walked back to high school. I have not talked to him since.
Yeah.
It was just that moment in time, and it was then and there that I decided I was never going to do drugs. I was never going to go down the path of those things. Yeah. Now, did it make me a saint and a perfect kid? Absolutely not. But it was one of those pivotal moments in my life where I made a select decision, which leads me
not to follow.
Certain,
even though the majority might be doing this, you decided not to follow it.
I decided not to go down that path. Now, it didn't fix all my problems. I was still a butthead. But,
sure, right. Still are, from
what I understand, from what I hear. Now, with that, I asked the question, throughout your journey, it could be, you know, before the orphanage, after the orphanage, was there ever a point where there was one person that was like one person that was always someone you could count on, you know? For me, it was my Portuguese grandma, my dad's mom. Mm-hmm. She was no matter what, I'll always love you. You could do X, Y, Z, and I would still show up every week with your goodie bag and type of thing. And I'll tell you that story in a second. But, you know, was there one person that was kind of like your rock, or were you truly you feel like you're on your own?
I wish I could say there was, but there wasn't. I think there could have been if, you know, you read the early part of that story where I had a cousin, Chrissy, that was a babysitter.
Yeah.
Now, she really...
The one that kisses you on the forehead.
She really liked us and was really upset when she found out that we were put in the orphanage, and even asked her mom if she could adopt us. But, of course, that wasn't possible because her mom was from my mother's side of the family, right? Mm-hmm. And there was no way our dad would ever allow that to happen. So anyway, there wasn't, but I would say there was a point at which the nuns, one of the sisters that was taking care of me at the time I was in St. John's, was helping me so much in my homework and everything that, I gave the sisters names based on their personalities rather than using their real names in the book, right? But so I might call them Sister Meanie or whatever, but there was a point at which she wasn't, she was Sister Not So Mean, and Sister Nice, eventually.
Yeah.
And I looked at her differently. I mean, before I looked at her as, maybe not so attractive, but, after she became Sister Nice, maybe she's not so, unattractive, So, and it was those times when things felt better. I mean, I still didn't feel at home, but it was more hopeful, right? Because this isn't as bad as I thought it was. Not quite the dungeon I talk about or the prison I talk about.
Yeah, she wasn't carrying a broom around with her.
Yeah,
there wasn't bats flying out the door and stuff. Yeah.
So, for the most part, it was on my own to do better.
Yeah.
And again, we talk about how it can differ. Now, my brother didn't have it as good because he really, during that time, he hadn't made that choice to switch from getting into trouble. Okay,
sure.
And the cigarette thing kind of got to that point because there was a point when I was actually absent from school for quite some time because I had gotten scarlet fever. And then when I returned, by the time I got back, and this is when I was at St. Stan's, we walked back and forth to school. And my brother had been with some of these boys that were causing trouble all the time. Well, by the time I got back, they were picking up cigarette butts off of the sidewalks and smoking them, right?
Yeah.
And he wanted me to, and I says, no. I'm not picking up anything. Do you know there could have been dogs that peed on that thing? I'm not picking
That's kind of my mentality. I'm just going to throw that out there now. Yeah.
I'm not doing that. So anyway, and there's, I'll admit I did try smoking at one time, but it choked me, just like you. And I told myself, and it's the same with drinking beer or anything else. If I don't like. If my body tells me there's something they don't like about it, whether it be the choking or the taste or something, I say, I'm not doing it.
I'm not doing it,
I don't care how many people are doing it. I'm not doing it. So I never smoked, and I never, I don't even drink beer, unless I'm, like I was taken to a winery the other day, and they're, I'm the only one that doesn't drink anything. So, they just, the pressure was,
can you put some Sprite in that for me?
A little bit, why don't you have this one that tastes like pina colada, pineapple? Okay, I'll take a sip.
Yeah.
So, but I'm not drinking it.
Yeah, and, I'm kind of fussy that way as well. But you bring up something interesting about the nuns in the orphanage. I had an experience with a master corporal when I was in the military. I was in the Army for a number of years. And at a master corporal, Akpata was his name. He was a stout little man, I will say, but built like a brick house. Just a solid guy, but mean. Oh my gosh! Going through basic training, I hated this guy. I thought he was the worst guy on the planet. I couldn't do anything right for him, no matter how hard I tried. He'd ask for volunteers, I was always trying to be the first volunteer. Put my hand up. Yes, Master Corporal, I'll do that for you. And he would just talk to me like garbage all the time.
Yeah.
And I tell the story about when I was taking my machine gunner's course, and when it was the first time I cried in the military, when he yelled at me for trying to help somebody.
Oh, okay.
What's this guy's not going to be able to? You're not going to be able to help him when you're in the trench, and he need, and his gun jams on his own. He needs to be able to figure it out. Blah blah blah. Stop helping him, And then he made me stand in the parade square for 5 hours, type of thing. Well, I don't think it was that long. It felt like 5 hours, but I remember just crying, thinking, I was just trying to help.
Right.
And then the very next day, I take my machine gunner's test, and who do I get as my instructor for the test? The person who's facilitating the test, Master Black Pad. I'm like, dang it. And I just remember when I was done that test, and of course I aced it because I was like the student,
Yeah.
And I just remember wanting to like glance up over my, my visor, thing that I had on, this military cap thing, and looking to see if he approved of my, they're called IAs and stoppages, my immediate actions and stoppages.
Uh-huh.
And just seeing this huge smile on his face, because it was the final test for me to be through my basic training, to moving on to my actual classes for my specialty. And seeing the smile on his face, and I thought, what in the world is that? It was almost like
never in the world did you expect that, right?
when she went from being meanie to nice, and
Yeah.
it was this moment of what just happened in my life, to where what I realized what had happened is he wasn't really being mean to me all that time. He was preparing me for something.
Right.
And it was a realization of, wait a second, life is hard, and you need to be able to struggle through that. And that's the real trick when learning how to get through those tough moments.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that was maybe some of what you were initially experiencing with her? Was this her preparing you for the day when she finally let off the pedal a little bit and said, "Okay, good job, you made it."
Absolutely. In fact, part of that being real nice was it was at a time when I was under a lot of pain because I had to go through, and that's later in their book there, had to go through getting teeth pulled. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so I think she was being a little bit soft on me, but from that point on, there was that connection when she was a little soft, but she's still strict about, you got to do your homework, you got to do all this kind of stuff.
Still got to do the things.
But, she's a little bit more friendly and.
She let her guard down a little more with you.
And when she did that, it was different. It was a different relationship from that point on.
So you get to the point where you're a teenager now, you move on to the next stage, you work on a farm, you're going back to school, like a normal, not the Catholic school, but to a public school system.
Western High School.
Talk a little bit about that journey now, how you start to turn into a man, basically.
Yeah, it was. We were happy to get away from the orphanage and get back to home. Mm-hmm. But my life actually in high school, the time that I was actually physically at school, was a relief from what was going on at home. Okay, and it's not like there was, a lot of abuse or anything like that. It's just that strict upbringing, that European strict kind of upbringing, Polish upbringing.
Yep.
Because my dad was Polish. And, but there was a lot of good things about that as well, learning to farm and all that kind of stuff, and learning to work and all the discipline that goes with that. It was just more fun and more pleasurable when I got away from home, because our family didn't socialize. We didn't go see other people or anything like that. We didn't go to get-togethers other than family get-togethers on Christmas and Easter sometimes. But we pretty much stayed at home, so we were kind of isolated. And it was kind of, I guess, because I was around a lot of boys and we chatted and talked a lot, I wanted more of that social contact, and I enjoyed that in school too. So that was my fun time, being able to communicate with others.
Is that your personality too? That you're extrovert a little bit?
Yeah.
Is that how you recharge?
Yeah, I like interacting with people and chatting with people and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So, but I also continued to want to do well in school, because I just saw that as the way that I was going to have a better life.
So you understood that school was the way that you could alter the trajectory of your life to some degree.
Yes, I mean, either that or I was going to end up being a farmer. And I didn't mind farming. I just didn't like to put my life in the hands of Mother Nature, who wasn't always, cooperative. And sometimes we'd have droughts and we didn't have crops and stuff like that. And I said, well, that doesn't sound like the life I really want to rely on. Mm-hmm. So I want to do better, and I knew I could do better because because of the training and education I got in the orphanage.
Yep.
The schoolwork in public school was really easy. It was easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, I had the discipline to do homework and everything like that. Mm-hmm. So getting good grades was easy. Not always that case for all the kids, but That's the way it was for me. I was fortunate. So, yes, I wanted to go continue on doing well in school. So I focused on doing good in school and so forth. So I got to the point where I decided I was wanting to go to college. And I was taking college prep kind of classes as well because the counselors suggested that I go that way, given the aptitude test and all that kind of stuff. When I told my father that I wanted to go to college, his response was, well, if you go to college, then you're not living here. And it was hard to understand, and I wasn't quite sure why he felt that way about college, but I think I learned later on that he had these negative feelings about people that went to college. I mean, he was a laborer, and I think maybe maybe a supervisor or something that came from college maybe didn't quite
tainted things a little bit. Yeah.
So there was something about the college thing that he said, either you're staying here and you're working on the farm or you're not living here. I said, well, if that's the case, I am going to school. And so that particular night, I packed up what little bit I had and walked away and went to a friend's house, and that's where I was on my path to a different life at that point in time. I left home. So that's when my friend took me to go see one of my high school teachers, and he was a debate coach for her. And so it was probably 11 o'clock or midnight that night when we're knocking on his door, and he and his wife invite me in and say, yeah, you can stay here.
Wow.
So,
and how long did you end up staying there?
Well, that was in December of my senior year, and so for the remainder of that year, I stayed there with him.
Yeah. Can I ask you a personal question? And again, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I can tell you I read this line and it rang true. Like it literally it made my chest tight when I read it.
Okay.
And it's I would say fairly early in the book, first half for sure. You're talking about your dad. And you say your dad must have heard you make a statement. So again, I grumbled to myself, easy for him to say he's not the one being dropped off, and you say, oops. This is your dad. This is as you're walking up to the orphanage doors,
right.
And you say, he must have heard me and shot you a glare. And your dad says to you, you think this is easy for me? This is your mother's fault. She's the one that left you. My parents always played each other back and forth. Always said, my dad this is the B word's fault. This is your mother's fault. And my mom would go the other way saying, this is our whole father's fault and blah, blah, blah. Was that something that was normal for you guys that you had to struggle with? Or was that an isolated incident that happened? Or was that, because it was, my parents tried to pit each other against each other all the time, and I found that to be really destructive as a kid.
I don't think that's all that uncommon anyway. I think there's a tendency where, it wasn't so much my mom because we didn't really see our mom other than once she had to give us up. She came to visit us once, and after that one visit, that was it. And I assume it's because my dad found out that she had visited and told the nuns, no more, right? You can't do this.
Yeah.
Now, I try to, like I told you before, I don't have any bad feelings for either of my parents or anything for why I ended up in that situation. I try to put myself in their shoes about why that might have been.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's an emotional thing. We were very emotional when our mom came to visit, and then because we thought she was there to rescue us, that we were going to leave when she came. Well, then when she says, I got to go, it was very traumatic, right? I mean, we're bawling our eyes out. What do you mean? You're leaving us? And, yes, I can't. Your dad won't let me take you, right?
Yep.
So I was too young to remember my mom, if she said anything negative about her dad, but I don't remember that. Sure. I don't remember that ever. Of course, now my dad's in a situation where he's got to take care of us, and try to keep us from being emotional because it's a hard thing to deal with as a parent, right? Especially that emotional. So I can only think that he does that to try to keep us from thinking about our mom, because anytime you're thinking about your mom, you get emotional.
Yeah, because
and
you do
later
say
on there is a time when I, I have that memory, it does get very emotional, and then he's upset because I'm so emotional about my mom, and that's when he, makes that statement. It's your mom's fault.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and the truth is, I don't look at it as either one of their faults. And I know the reason why it all happened. It's a very personal thing that I can't share publicly with everybody. But I still don't think it's either one of their faults. It's the life they were living at that time and what their thoughts were about that time, and they had their own kind of way of dealing with certain things that were important to them.
Yeah. All right. So you go on to college.
Yeah.
You stay with your teacher. You go on to college. You have a successful career at IBM.
Mm-hmm.
You start writing books. All appearances, everything is copacetic, and then suddenly you get this notion to write this book. Your wife has a revelation of your past, and now you're doing book tours for Andy and the St. Joseph's Home for Boys.
Yeah.
What's next? Like, what is the next step of this journey? Like, what happens now with this book?
Well, that book is something that I wasn't planning on sharing, but it was
because you got to
such
know
a
this is going
big
to
part
impact
of my heart and soul.
Yeah.
And so it's probably the best writing that I have. So I don't know that I go beyond this particular book. I mean, I could write about my current story, but you haven't gotten to it. But I wrote a very extensive epilogue in there about my life after the orphanage that included going up to where I am pretty much today, summarizing that. I mean, that epilogue is probably the longest epilogue in any book ever. It's probably the equivalent of 3 chapters, and it's broken into 3 parts.
Wow.
So I don't know where I go from here. I mean, I didn't think I was going to write this book, so, and I'm thinking I don't know that I'll write another book, but I don't know. I tend to go with, I believe that God has established a path for me.
Sure.
And so when something comes up, I follow that.
Yeah.
And I have found that has helped me throughout my life. Okay, so I don't plan on changing that.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't imagine writing the science fiction books, but since God decided to put these in my dreams, I decided I better follow that, and that's what I did. And it's probably good that I wrote those books, because I became very experienced about writing books and how to publish books. It made writing this latest book a whole lot easier, and a whole lot easier to publish, because I'd been through that experience. And I had all those members, supporting me on my author page, all the way. The people from the Jackson area have been fabulous. I mean, just phenomenal in their support of this. I mean,
so it's obvious. So take your fiction books, and that lady's shaking you in the store and saying, when are you writing book 2? And you're like, what are you even talking about right now? That's kind of my thought process with this. I mean, as Veronica and I have taken the journey that is Rise Above, people have continually come to us and said things like, oh my gosh, you got to write this down. You have to write a book about your life journey, how you get this full fruition, this full circle of, of healing essentially that's taken place, to where, there are people that are going to read this book and weep, that they're going to have an experience with you. And like I said, myself, I got the book yesterday, so I was reading fast. But I'm telling you, when I go back and I read the book in its entirety, and I take the time to really ingest what you're putting down, I can tell you already, just from the quick reading that I'm having, it's going to affect me. And there's going to be a point where somebody's going to come to you and say, Andy, I really need you to come and talk to my group. I really need you to come and tell your story here. Like you're not done here. You're going to be doing some other book signing and some other interviews and whatnot as well while you're in town. So thank you for taking the time to come here and to share with us today. But you've got to know that people are going to respond to you in a way that it may not be another book. It could just be, hey, I'm going to come in to share with you how that, as you said right away, that there are disruptive challenges disguised as opportunities, how you're going to talk about how you overcame some difficulty and used it as a strength.
Well, it has already happened, just you and I being here today.
Absolutely.
Is part of that, but I have gotten feedback already from people about, they were thankful that this book came out when it did during this coronavirus thing. And they were so happy to have something to read like this that they could really dive into and remember the good things of their past and maybe some of the other, challenges of their past, but, that they're today in a better place than they were and and so forth. And a lot of people, have taken the lessons that are in that book and some of them, the quotes, people have said they really like those quotes at the front of each chapter and said, it's really helped me think about some of my stuff in a different way. And I'm glad for that. So, I agree. There's probably things I'm going to be involved with that I hadn't even thought of.
I think your journey's just starting, my brother. And Nappy says, the story that you have here fits so well with the Rise Above the stories. Too many of our kids are trapped in this situation. And again, for some of you that don't know, and you may or may not know this, one of our students was murdered last Thursday.
Oh, no. I didn't know that.
Here in Jackson. And that's where when you called me, I thought, man, it's just so fitting that we're having this conversation now, because so many kids right now are stuck in a place like this, where their world is crumbling around them. They're in this strange place and they don't know what to do next, and they think literally that it's the end of the world. And then when you can walk them through not just a war story, but a story where there's redemption at the end. It's just it's a completely different conversation. And when we bring students in here at Rise Above, the first thing we do is we quickly forget about what happened yesterday. We start talking about what's going to happen today and tomorrow. And I say forget about, not permanently, just for the moment. We let it sit. We let it rest, And I refer to it as cutting the rope to that thing, that moment in time. We don't let that thing define us, because I think, and the reason why I say this is so many people will let an experience like this define who they become in life, instead of letting it be an empowerment to something greater. You talk a little bit about your faith in this. I'm an ordained minister, and again, that's what brought us to Michigan in the first place, the fact that I was going to Spring Arbor to get my theological degree. But would you mind talking a little bit about your faith and how it played into this journey? Obviously, you were in a Catholic church before this happened. Obviously, this was nuns were running it, so there's a Catholic church and school involved. And has that continued to play a role throughout your journey as well, or?
Well, I would say my connection with God certainly does. Okay, I wouldn't say the church so much. Okay, but if it wasn't for what I went through in terms of my teachings at school and through the church and what the sisters taught me, I would probably not have that connection I have with God today and understand how important it is, right? I wouldn't give that up for anything. I mean, probably one of the things in my own mind that seems a little lacking with some of what's going on in today's world is there's, less emphasis on that with some people and some families.
Sure, I understand.
And I wouldn't want that changed. I'm glad I went through all that, but I got a connection with God that's there every day. That we talk.
We use the word hope, right? So in getting to what the statement you just made about society today and whatnot, what a lot of people, when you listen to the stories that are being told around the pandemic, around some of the rioting and whatnot, you talk about desperateness, you talk about the lack of hope that people just that's what's missing.
That's a thing that eats at you. That's a thing
it's
that
so
really
destructive.
is so destructive.
Yeah.
And if you focus on doing what's good to help make you better and help others around you better, trying to help others become better. Listen to people and their problems and see what you can do to maybe make it feel a little better for them.
If you don't like where you're at, change where you're at.
Yeah. But if you focus on that and you're always hopeful, I mean, there is never a thought of my mind. When I hear people get to the point of desperation to commit suicide, that's a thought that doesn't ever enter my mind because I don't have that. Even no matter how hard it gets, this coronavirus, everything else, some of the stuff that's going on, we're going to work our way out of this. As long as we put our minds together that we can make this better, it will be better. And you just got to focus on the good things, okay? Stay away from the things that are causing you trouble and pain inside. Stay away from people that, the friends that kind of drag you into that kind of thing.
Feed fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stay away from that. Stay on the positive. Help some of your friends that may be thinking of those things to maybe think more positively about life and what's going on, so that maybe give them more hope.
And we find a lot of times with our students, really, honestly, Nappy, focus on hope and faith is one thing. Because when one of the things that we focus on a lot with our students when they come in the front door, and you talked about it earlier, this idea they have to decide. That was, we talked about this yesterday when you did a little tour of the building, is that, it's the student who decides to come here. Nobody mandates that they're a part of this program. They functionally, the very last question we ask is, do you want to be here? They get to make that decision, and it isn't until they make that decision. And it's the first decision that they make, right, towards fixing whatever they see as the problem.
Right.
It's not what I see as a problem. It's not what their parents. It's the first decision that they make towards fixing whatever they see as the problem holding them back.
Absolutely. It's that first time that they are taking the step in the right direction to hope.
Yes.
Right.
And that's why it's rise above with hope and courage.
It doesn't matter if mom and dad tell you need to do this or somebody else tells you need to do this. You have to decide this for yourself, that you're going to go down that path.
Absolutely. Good management class there, too. Principles of Management 101. It's one of those things where, that's probably our biggest hurdle early on with students that are in situations that are difficult or where they're struggling, or when we talk about students who are caught up in gang violence and whatnot, is they're there because of a lack of hope, and that's the first person that says, "Here, I can help you." And it's a miss instead of instead of a home run, and we know it's a miss. So the first thing, and that's what we're saying, it's rise above with hope and courage is our actual name, and because we provide the hope, they provide the courage, because they have to step forward, and then we walk with them hand in hand as they journey through this dark place.
Everything you've talked to me about your program is something that sounds great. I mean, it's going down that right path of trying to help people find the true light to their own happiness.
Yep.
Because, unless they start focusing on that part of their life, then they can get swallowed up by things that just are things that you just want to stay away from.
So, Andy, where do we find your books?
Oh, they're all on Amazon. Okay.
And they just type in Andy
Skrzyński, Skrzyński.
Okay.
And you will find that'll take you probably to my author page where my books would be listed. Or you can go to my website, which has a lot more detail about all of this.
And you can type your website on the thing there. Just make sure your cursor's below chat there.
All right.
If you'd like to.
I
think I've actually got it here.
There. Oops.
I linked the Amazon page for about the author there, so they can find all your books and whatnot.
So if you go to Andy Skrzyński,
You just
at gmail.com.
Just hit enter or click the chat button when you're done. Yeah.
That will
I'll take care of that. No worries.
that will take you to my website. And again, my website will have descriptions of these books and a lot more information about each of the books and where you can go. And they have links there to take you to Amazon directly, if you're interested in purchasing the books.
So that's a good start there. Pardon me. And
anybody that's in Jackson that might want to come and purchase a book at the book signings.
Thank you, Andy.
You can go to the book signings on July 30th from 2 to 7. That's a Thursday.
Okay.
And that's at the Book Cottage on Francis Street near Vandercook Lake.
Okay.
And then I'll have a second one on August 8th. That's a Saturday. And now it's going to be from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I'll be signing books there at the Book Cottage as well.
Awesome. Well, I can't tell you enough how thankful I am that we were able to make this happen on kind of short notice, within a week and a bit here.
Yeah.
I was so excited to get the phone call and email and just to say, hey, we want to donate some books. And I was like, wait a second, there might be more to this. We might do something pretty fun here, especially something that's a treat for
I've enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, it's a treat for my audience to get something other than just my clanging cymbals and gongs here on the channel. Even though we have some pretty fun discussions at times. Andy, you are always welcome, my friend. If you're ever in town and you want to come and just talk about your next project, talk about how God is using you, or just come and shoot the breeze with me about anything, I'd be happy to.
It's been a lot of fun.
Talk to you about it.
I thought this was going to be a long interview, but it's flown by.
Yeah. And I told you 2 hours will go fast. It'll feel.
When you have fun.
And honestly, I still have a ton of other stuff I could talk to you about. So, thank you everybody that joined.
For listening.
Yeah. And everybody that participated today. And Andy, thank you for the gifted sub to Hell's Nemesis. I appreciate it. Nappy for the resub and all that kind of stuff. So, Andy, thank you again. God bless you, brother, and wish you the best of luck in all your future writings.
God bless you, too.
Thanks. Chat, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for everyone that showed up today. You guys are awesome. Andy, thanks for posting those links. And appreciate you all. We'll see you all next Monday for the stream. And to ensure that things go forward successfully, come with more ideas for the coming weeks. Make sure that we're all ready for the next big conversation. Thanks for everyone that is part of the gym and continued giving to Rise Above. Appreciate you guys. And bye for now.